All right, let's read another edition of The Rambler by Dr. Johnson. This is number 32 for Saturday, July 7th, 1750. The title is The Vanity of Stoicism, The Necessity of Patience. Boy, this book is so old I can barely creak it open. I can feel the spine, stressing, so I don't want to, I'll have to kind of gaze at it. It opens with a bit of Greek that I can't even read, so I'll skip that. And then there's a quote from Elphinston, who Johnson quotes a lot. Of all the woes that load the mortal state, whatever thy portion, mildly meet thy fate, but ease it as thou canst. So large a part of human life passes in a state contrary to our natural desires that one of the principal topics of moral instruction is the art of bearing calamities. As such is the certainty of evil that it is the duty of every man to furnish his mind with those principles that may enable him to act under it with decency and propriety. The sect of ancient philosophers that boasted to have carried this necessary science to the highest perfection were the Stoics, or scholars of Zeno, whose wild enthusiastic virtue pretended to an exemption from the sensibilities of unenlightened mortals, and who proclaimed themselves exalted by the doctrines of their sect above the reach of those miseries which embitter life to the rest of the world. They therefore removed pain, poverty, loss of friends, exile, and violent death from the catalogue of evils, and passed, in their haughty style, a kind of irreversible decree by which they forbade them to be counted any longer among the objects of terror or anxiety, or to give any disturbance to the tranquillity of a wise man. This edict was, I think, not universally observed, for though one of the more resolute, when he was tortured by a violent disease, cried out that let pain harass him to its utmost power, it should never force him to consider it as other than indifferent and neutral. Yet all had not stubbornness to hold out against their senses, for a weaker pupil of Zeno is recorded to have confessed, in the anguish of the gout, that he now found pain to be an evil. It may, however, be questioned whether these philosophers can be very properly numbered among the teachers of patience. For if pain be not an evil, there seems no instruction requisite how it may be borne, and therefore, when they endeavor to arm their followers with arguments against it, they may be thought to have given up their first position. But such inconsistencies are to be expected from the greatest understandings when they endeavor to grow eminent by singularity, and employ their strength in establishing opinions opposite to nature. The controversy about the reality of external evils is now at an end. That life has many miseries, and that those miseries are, sometimes at least, equal to all the powers of fortitude, is now universally confessed. And therefore, it is useful to consider not only how we may escape them, but by what means those which either the accidents of affairs or the infirmities of nature must bring upon us may be mitigated and lightened, and how we may make those hours less wretched, which the condition of our present existence will not allow to be very happy. The cure for the greatest part of human miseries is not radical, but palliative. Infelicity is involved in corporal nature, and interwoven with our being. All attempts, therefore, to decline it wholly are useless and vain, and armies of pain send their arrows against us on every side. The choice is only between those which are more or less sharp, or tinged with poison of greater or less malignity, and the strongest armor which reason can supply will only blunt their points, but cannot repel them. The great remedy which heaven has put in our hands is patience, by which, though we cannot lessen the torments of the body, we can, in a great measure, preserve the peace of the mind, and shall suffer only the natural and genuine force of an evil, without heightening its acrimony or prolonging its effects. There is, indeed, nothing more unsuitable to the nature of man in any calamity than rage and turbulence, which, without examining whether they are or not sometimes impious, are at least always offensive, and incline others rather to hate and despise than to pity and assist us. If what we suffer has been brought upon us by ourselves, it is observed by an ancient poet that patience is eminently our duty, since no one should be angry at feeling that which he has deserved. Let pain deserve, here's a little quote, or it's a quote from Latin, or translation from Latin, no author citation though. Maybe it's Johnson's own. Anyway, it's singled out. Let pain deserved without complaint be borne. Wow. Beginning again, or continuing. And surely, if we are conscious that we have not contributed to our own sufferings, if punishment falls upon innocence, or disappointment happens to industry and prudence, patience, whether more necessary or not, is much easier, since our pain is then without aggravation, and we have not the bitterness of remorse to add to the asperity of misfortune. In those evils which are allotted to us by Providence, such as deformity, privation of any of the senses, or old age, it is always to remember that impatience can have no present effect, but to deprive us of the consolations which our condition admits, by driving away from us those by whose conversation or advice we might be amused or helped, and that with regard to futurity, it is yet less to be justified, since without lessening the pain, it cuts off the hope of that reward which he, by whom it is inflicted, will confer upon them that bear it well. In all evils which admit a remedy, impatience is to be avoided, because it wastes that time and attention in complaints that, if properly attained, might remove the cause. Turenne, among the acknowledgments which he used to pay in conversation to the memory of those by whom he had been instructed in the art of war, mentioned one with honor, who taught him not to spend his time in regretting any mistake which he had made, but to set himself immediately and vigorously to repair it. Patience and submission are very carefully to be distinguished from cowardice and indolence. We are not to repine, but we may lawfully struggle, for the calamities of life, like the necessities of nature, are calls to labor and exercises of diligence. When we feel any pressure of distress, we are not to conclude that we can only obey the will of heaven by languishing under it, any more than when we perceive the pain of thirst, we are to imagine that water is prohibited. Of misfortune it never can be certainly known whether, as proceeding from the hand of God, it is an act of favor or of punishment. But since all the ordinary dispensations of Providence are to be interpreted according to the general analogy of things, we may conclude that we have a right to remove one inconvenience as well as another, that we are only to take care lest we purchase ease with guilt, and that our Maker's purpose, whether of reward or severity, will be answered by the labors which he lays us under the necessity of performing. This duty is not more difficult in any state than in disease intensely painful, which may, indeed, suffer such exacerbations, as seem to strain the powers of life to their utmost stretch, and leave very little of the attention vacant to precept or reproof. In this state, the nature of man requires some indulgence, and every extravagance but impiety may be easily forgiven him. Yet lest we should think ourselves too soon entitled to the mournful privileges of irresistible misery, it is proper to reflect that the utmost anguish which human wit can contrive, or human malice can inflict, has been borne with constancy, and that if the pains of disease be, as I believe they are, sometimes greater than those of artificial torture, they are therefore in their own nature shorter. The vital frame is a very Stoic statement there, huh? Marking in pencil. They are therefore in their own nature shorter. I already said that. The vital frame is quickly broken, or the union between soul and body is for a time suspended by insensibility, and we soon cease to feel our maladies when they once become too violent to be borne. I think there is some reason for questioning whether the body and mind are not so proportioned that the one can bear all that can be inflicted on the other, whether virtue cannot stand its ground as long as life, and whether a soul well principled will not be separated sooner than subdued. In calamities which operate chiefly on our passions, such as diminution of fortune, loss of friends, or declension, tough word, declension of character, the chief danger of impatience is upon the first attack, and many expedients have been contrived by which the blow may be broken. Of these, the most general precept is not to take pleasure in anything of which it is not in our power to secure the possession to ourselves. This counsel, when we consider the enjoyment of any terrestrial advantage, as opposed to a constant and habitual solicitude for future felicity, is undoubtedly just and delivered by that authority which cannot be disputed. But in any other sense, it is not like advice. It is not like advice, not to walk lest we should. Hold on. This counsel, I'm going to go back just a bit. This counsel, when we consider the enjoyment of any terrestrial advantage, as opposed to the constant and habitual solicitude for future felicity, is undoubtedly just and delivered by that authority which cannot be disputed. But in any other sense, it is not like advice, not to walk lest we should stumble, or not to see lest our eyes should light upon deformity. It seems to me reasonable to enjoy blessings which confidence, as well as to resign them with submission, and to hope for the continuance of good which we possess without insolence or voluptuousness. As for the restitution of that which we lose without despondency or murmurs. Last paragraph. The chief security against the fruitless anguish of impatience must arise from frequent reflection on the wisdom and goodness of the God of nature, in whose hands are riches and poverty, honor and disgrace, pleasure and vain, and life and death. A settled conviction of the tendency of everything to our good, and the possibility of turning miseries into happiness by receiving them rightly, will incline us to bless the name of the Lord, whether he gives or takes away. All right, now I will confess that about the last third of this I didn't quite follow everything. I'm going to watch or listen to this as I ride my motorcycle to work this morning. Sometimes hearing it a second time helps. This, of course, this was written. This book is almost 200 years old. Next 2 years, it'll be 200 years old. This was written 40 years ago. It's in that 18th century British English. And of course, it's Dr. Samuel Johnson who writes. His eloquence is second to none. But it takes practice to get it. But my experience has been reading 31 of these already, that going back, if you don't quite get it, go back and listen to it again, especially because if I listen to it, then I don't have to do the work of reading it, and I can pay attention to what the words are, even if they're my own words. and I can usually discern a little more. But it sounds, I've picked up a couple of nice Stoic principles there. I made note of them. Maybe I can extract them out as quotes. What I want to catch that I didn't catch is the admonition that Johnson offers to the Stoics in the title there, which sounds like he was kind of taking Stoicism to task just a little bit. Well, he certainly was in that first part, that beginning. But the title again is The Vanity of Stoicism, the necessity of patience. So saying that it's less about having, I think he would say it would be less about arming ourselves with philosophical principles that can keep us safe, as much as simply having the patience to bear the pain and the challenges that come. But I think what Johnson, dare I say, might be missing, that it's a difference in simply seeing the world differently. That the Stoic, if they're able to realize that indifferent things include fortune, health, and reputation, then you can really train yourself to feel that way. Then the loss of those things can be borne without feeling as a sense of loss, because you didn't value them in the same way to begin with. It doesn't mean you can't pursue those things, but you recognize that they're holding on to them and keeping them is a problematic thing, and not to be expected. If we've got those things, if we've got our health, if we've got our wealth, if we've got our reputation, then that's a good thing. If we don't have them, well, I shouldn't say it. It wouldn't be Stoic to say it's a good thing at all, right? It would be, it's neither good nor bad. It is simply a thing, whether I have it or not. I think that's the thing that the Stoic might argue with Johnson about, but I'll have to give it a second listen. Isn't this such a beautiful book? I just love these. I've got a whole collection of Johnson, just a little tricky to read because it's so old, but it's just beautiful. Thanks for watching. Take care.